muted and I have it, the video stopped, but so.
Hey, Jackie.
Yeah. I guess you have to make do. No, it's, I think we're good.
Stop
Because you
linking.
just did pick me up here. Bob, will you try to?
Oh, yeah, I can try to say something.
I think we're good, because it's picking him up and it's picking me up.
Got it. So you want me to talk so that the owl looks at me while I got it. Okay.
It's picking them both up.
All right. No, we're gonna be late. Go ahead and get started. Carol was up here 15 minutes late. Yeah. I'd like to call this meeting to order. It's 6:01 p.m. and we have 4 select members here. Carol will be late. Welcome everybody. Any public comments for items not on the agenda for discussion, not action? Paul.
I didn't see it on the agenda, but it will be brief. I think the decision to remove the parking on the west side of the Stone Pier is a big mistake. And I would rather see the effort be focused on solutions to a bigger issue down in that region. We have talked before about the fact that the town already has the money in capital planning to widen Stone Pier. The design has already been completed, right? And the parking that would be created there would be significant in addition to improved traffic flow. So I would like to ask the selectmen to please reconsider the current direction down on the wharf and focus on the improvements to the stone wall, please.
Thanks, Paul. Other comments from the public? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to town reports, DA report.
Hi, everybody. All right, so I'll start out with the town administrator's report, and there's quite a few things that were in the memo, but then some other things that have, since I wrote this memo last week, have wrapped up or come up that I think are worth sharing this evening. So the first thing on the memo is that we are actively looking for 3 positions for the town: public works, labor, bookkeeper, parking attendant. I am happy to say that in executive session, I will have some recommendations to bring forth to you about all 3 positions. Committee members needed. Finance committee information has been shared on the town website. That is the most newly formed committee by the board. We do have 2 applicants that we've already received for that committee, which is great. In order for that committee to start working together, there needs to be a minimum of 3. And so we are looking for 1 more member for that. We've also received 1 applicant for the transfer station committee, which we've been actively looking for people to join for the last 2 years. We have 1 member. We need 2 members in order for that committee to start actively doing anything as a board. At the same time, we still have other boards like Board of Adjustment Appeals that is short of 2 board members. So if there's anybody out there that's interested or you know anybody, please let us know. Because I think some of the committee members, especially that have joined recently, are looking to start making some progress. But unfortunately, to follow the proper audit policy and protocol, there needs to be full committees in order for that to happen.
I know for some quasi-judicial boards, select board members cannot be members, like Board of Appeals, planning boards. You can't be a member of the select board and one of those. But for something like the transfer station.
So with the transfer station and with the facilities committee, the guidelines are specific in terms of there is a select board member who could participate as a non-voting member, but they cannot sit in as a board member to make a parking and traffic update. So since implementing the new traffic and parking ordinance, there's been a lot of hype around it around the community. There's been positive feedback and some negative feedback, as we just heard. The sheriff has been down there and Public Works has been down there to try to implement some of the changes. The ultimate goal with these changes is really to provide safety and traffic flow. The no parking area in the location that Paul was just referencing is something that is only being experimented until Labor Day. So it is not a long-term thing. And what I've been doing is I've been kind of keeping track of the comments that are coming in, comments that are formally coming into us, similar like we just got from Paul. very different from kind of the hearsay that you hear from people or things that people put on social media. So comments that are actually coming into us, and anybody that comes and talks to me, I have told them to encourage, share positive feedback, whether it's good or bad. It's information that we want to hear, and that I have spoken to Bob about this, that after Labor Day, at some point in September, I would like to bring that ordinance kind of back to the board for discussion, so there could be a discussion about what worked, what didn't, what are the next steps in trying to make improvements, and how could suggestions be implemented in that. So. Next thing is the FEMA update. So I do continue to meet now bi-weekly. It used to be every week. Now it's bi-weekly with FEMA. Within the last couple of weeks, I have provided information relevant to debris removal and emergency measures, which are two different categories. That the deadline for those to be finalized is at the end of September, September 20th. We are in good standings, and they have everything they need at this point from our end to be able to fulfill and finish that. So we will have at least some of the work complete. The permanent work is not required to be done until September 20th of 2025. So we're not really in any major rush to try to figure out with some of these bigger issues what the decisions are going to be. There are ultimately extensions that we would be able to file. We do have a new representative who, the gentleman that I've been in direct contact with, is no longer going to be working with us come September 12th. So we will be provided with a new representative, which I'm hopeful about, because I'm hoping that that would put us in a better position of being able to make a little bit more progress than where we are currently at. I also did connect with MEMA representative today. I got a call from them, and that was relevant to the last board discussion where we talked about South Shore Drive, which is actually on the next topic. Where things were left is I needed to contact MEMA to try to coordinate a meeting with MEMA and the residents of South Shore Drive to start the next discussions about what could take place down there. Ultimately, most likely get into a point of engineering. And so I did receive conversations from MEMA today, and MEMA will try to coordinate to try to come out here and meet with us in the next couple of weeks. So that's positive on that end. The residents of South Shore Drive are aware that the survey has been complete and the board has had that information presented to them, and that we are in contact of getting MEMA out here to determine what the next steps should be. And so the point of contact that I have knows that information, and then he distributes it through email to the rest of the residents. So I'm not communicating with every single resident in the area. So that's the stuff that was in the TA report. Any questions about that before I touch base on a couple other things that have come up since? Okay. So a couple of other things real quick. We did have a couple of freedom of access requests. We did have another one by a resident in Bennett's Cove area looking for more information. Similar information. I have sent all of the information that was shared with GEI. I also had the code enforcement officer provide an email, because one of the freedom of access requests was asking for things that we did not have. And so the code enforcement officer provided an email that I forwarded explaining what was done and why the documents that were being provided were not needed and did not ultimately get filed. So that's one thing. The other is there's been some legal communications that have come in the last couple of days referencing to the McKee property and the legal standings that the town continues to be a part of in that. The town attorney is requesting that she have an executive session with the select board. The available dates are next Monday or Tuesday, 6 p.m. Zoom. It would be an executive session specifically to talk about legal matters. There has been documents that have been provided, which have been forwarded to the board, but the attorney needs direction from the board as far as what the next steps are. And she has 21 days from the delivery of those documents to provide a response, and then she needs some time to actually work on the response based on what the board is recommending. So does 6 p.m. either on Monday or Tuesday work for the entire board or majority of the board to be able to have an executive session through Zoom to hear what the attorney has to share, so then you can make some decisions about how to move forward?
I think that's okay with me.
This Monday is good for me.
Monday?
Monday's good for me, Monday's good for Carol, she just texted as well.
She did? Okay, so Monday is good. So I'll let her know that Monday for the majority will work. And we will advertise for an executive session, Zoom. And it will be, the executive session will be specific to, attorney, discussions.
6 p.m.
6 p.m. Yep. And I'll send out, what I'll do is I will create a specific Zoom login or a Zoom meeting invite that's going to be separate from the regular Board of Selectmen. So that way it's private, that nobody by accident joins in. All right, so 6 p.m. Monday. I'll let her know tomorrow about that. The last thing is, it seems like for several months now, I've been going back and forth with Yarmouth. They had a new town manager. We've gone through some transitions. Quite a few months ago, the select board asked me to connect with Yarmouth to have their engineer, Public Works, and possibly somebody like Custom Floats present at Cousins Island Dock to go over what repairs are needed, if any information had been submitted to FEMA about those damages and so forth. We finally settled on a date for 8/28, which is next week. Carol and Mark, who had previously been on the board, were the two representatives that were communicating with CTC. And so Carol would be the one board member, and we would need another board member who would be interested in taking over the seat that Mark used to hold to have the discussion with CTC, in which case, if you were interested in coming to that, you can next week. Otherwise, I will go and I will meet them. I did contact CTC General Manager Matt Ridgway to let him know, and he's going to also make a presence there. And so we will get information from them about what the plan is for repair, if they submitted anything to FEMA for damages, what the engineer report is as far as the next steps moving forward, and if there is anything that their Public Works department could do in the meantime before now and then. Is there anybody on the board who would be interested? I don't have record that we replaced Mark for this particular discussion, so.
I mean,
You can see.
I've gotten through other CTC, so I was some interest. And when on?
So it's 8/28, which is next week. And I will be going on the 8 o'clock boat, meeting them on Cousins Island, and then hopefully catching the 10. If not, I'll be in town for a couple hours.
I can. I'll go over with you.
Yep, that's fine. So is that good? Yeah. That's all I have for the TA report. If you don't have any questions, I'll move on to the treasurers. Good. All right. All right, so the treasurer's report, as of August 15th, reconciliation was done through June 30th. I did begin the July reconciliation today. And so I'm hoping that by the end of the week, we'll be through July and be caught up. At this point, we are still paying fiscal year 24 as well as fiscal year 25 bills. So it's still difficult to know where we'll end up at end of the year for fiscal year 24 budget, but having gone through the budget and looking at any additional expenses that we anticipate, it does appear that we're in pretty good standings with the budget. There is going to be roughly $96,000 in excess that we're anticipating of unexpended money from that budget that would roll over into the undesignated funds. But that's hard to tell for certain until we go through all that. And with me not having the level of experience with budgeting and accounting, I would leave that to the auditors to really determine the final number. The only department that we went over in was the administrative department, which was anticipated, and we did ask the taxpayers for an additional $15,000 in fiscal year, if in the June 2024 town meeting. And where we stand at this point, it looks like we're only about using $2,700 of that. So the full amount wasn't going to be needed, which is what I was hoping for. So the difference between what is needed and the 15,000, the difference will go back into undesignated fund, which is good news. There is the attached reserve account summary. If anybody has any questions about that, we did recently, the school transferred from their undesignated funds, I believe it was about $165,000 into different reserve accounts. So that was anticipated to show up in the July, but then the bank did it a little bit later. So that will be in the August one. The 500, I think it was $556,000 from town meeting that was designated to go into reserve accounts. That I'm waiting to initiate the transfer, just because if you look at the most current warrant, it's about a $300,000 warrant, I believe it is. So I'm waiting until we really start collecting tax revenue. So not that we have a low bank account, but we try to keep it in the 1.2, 1.5 million. So when we start now collecting tax revenue, I will then initiate the transfer from the checking account into those reserve accounts. So then we're not feeling a pretty good dent of $500,000 going out of the checking account. So that you'll see in the next couple of months. Any questions in reference to any of what I just said? Okay. The only other report that's in there was the Cumberland County sends us a monthly report in terms of the different calls that are relevant to what the sheriff does, and that's attached. And I can't really give you much more detail on it than what's in front of you. So if you don't have any other questions, then that wraps up the reports.
I'd like to just ask two very simple questions about committees, if I may. Question number one is specific to coastal waters committee. Has that been filled with a fifth member?
I believe there are 5 members, yes.
Question number two is for the board, if I may. Are you prepared to consider formalizing the budget committee for filling that for a permanent standing situation?
We have, that's been voted on. And at this point, we're collecting numbers, but we won't, the committee won't get going until we have a full slate of members. I think we have 2 of the 5.
Yeah, we have. So what the board adopted at the last meeting was essentially a draft ordinance that Herb Main really worked to draft most of it up, and the board adopted that as a guideline for the committee to work for the next year and then bring recommendations to the board about how it could be changed if it would go to ordinance for a town meeting vote. We do have it active on the website to recruit members. We've had 2 members that the board has already appointed. And so we're just waiting to collect enough members for them to actually start the process. So
Great, thank you.
if you're interested, we need a 3rd board member to get that board active.
All right. Moving on then to regular business, item 24-075 to discuss the letter received from the Maine Department of Transportation in reference to the Blanchard lot lease agreement and to take any necessary action. A little bit of background, the Blanchard lot agreement is aging nicely, I guess you could say. It expires in 2049. And it just tells us how many cars we can put in there. 165 is the limit. But it also states that capital improvements are at the expense of the leasee, the town should be. And the letter from DOT goes on to say that in the spirit of cooperation, they would be willing to entertain 50% match up to, I believe, $750,000 local versus state. So a match of $750 from them maximum, and our part would be anything up to $750 and beyond, depending on what capital improvements we envision. Mika, do you have anything else you can add from the conversation that you had with them about this?
No, this letter really summarizes the reason that we received this is several months ago, the board asked me to reach out to Chris Mayo, who is with DOT in reference to getting more information about the maintenance of the lot, because it was assumed by some that that was on the sole responsibility of DOT. And it was through that meeting that it was really made clear to the town that that is not the case. But this, they would be willing to work with the town and make a contribution. And so it was a number of weeks, if not over a month after that initial meeting, that a formal document was presented with the town, which is why it's in front of you now.
In the original conversation, if I remember correctly, we were talking about the increasing frequency of the lot going partially underwater. Is that correct? Sea level rise.
It's, yeah, the January storms is really what sparked with so much flooding and so much, so many vehicles getting damaged to start talking about what the capital improvements could look like for that lot, which led to this meeting, which led to this letter.
And then one more point, in one of the meetings with the DOT, and I don't remember which, but I believe it was with Chris Mayo, he offered the unofficial, unengineered observation that, in his opinion, it's likely that any method that would be approved by them of dealing with sea level rise would result in a fairly dramatic reduction in the number of fixes.
That was very clearly stated. Yep. That there is no space to go out due to the level of protection around the parking lot. In order for it to go up, it would have to go in, ultimately decreasing the number of spaces that are provided.
David, okay, David and Len.
Do we have any idea what kind of remediation might be under consideration and what the cost would be? And if not, can we find out what our options are?
No idea about what the costs are. I think that's kind of the purpose of having this in front of you, is for the board to have a consensus about how you want to proceed with this discussion with DOT, what you want to undertake, and to what level you want to involve Yarmouth, who has some other real estate on Cousins Island that we might want to fight for.
Len?
Right, thank you. It seems to me it would would never be worthwhile to remediate, especially if we were losing spaces. And reading this letter led me to read the lease agreement with Yarmouth and looking at the really substantial changes that have happened since that lease agreement was made. For example, the off-site parking was only seasonal, and now we rely on it so fully. So looking at the substantial changes, I think it's time to look at that anew.
Are you talking about the lease itself?
I think the lease, how much we rely on that parking lot. I hear from people how difficult it is to park there if they're parking later at night when the lot is full. The issue of larger vehicles being parked in there and taking up more space. So I think it's clearly I hear about it as concerns from people here.
And would you get into?
No. Not as far as this agreement with me. That sounds like not a bad idea, but as far as, looking for another site. That's been a long time. A lot of people would support that if we could. So, about doing any remediation and moving spaces.
Yeah, so remediation is not an option. I mean, we have no choice. We're gonna have to graze it. Or we're going to continue to rust cars out when we have high tide events that coincide with storm. We have the option of deciding we're just gonna let that happen and let people take their chances, but it doesn't seem like a responsible approach. I've had two informal conversations in which Yarmouth civic officials asked the question if we would be interested in talking about other options for parking. And it was in the context of a conversation in which these two civic officials mentioned that there were loose conversations about parking the Wyman Station. Re-examining their relationship with Wyman Station. So in thinking about that, if parking, wildest dream, if we move parking to Wyman Station, I think there's enough acreage there that a lot, if not all of our parking could be in one place. However, it would be a much longer boat ride. Probably, I'm guessing 15 or 20 minutes longer boat ride. A little more exposure to weather, not dramatically, but I think it, my opinion, might be appropriate to enter into those conversations. I think at one point we had two board members assigned to conversations with Yarmouth. I was one of them. Was Vika the other one? Was Carol the other
Yes,
one?
it was.
Yeah.
So it had been Jen, and I believe Carol was the one that ended up stepping in once Jen stepped out.
Yeah. Well, she's not here, so we can take that up at another time. The conversation about exploring other locations. And I don't know if people in the town have talked about other locations besides Wyman. Maybe there are other places out there haven't thought about it. Obviously, real estate's gonna be pretty expensive on Cousins Island and anywhere close to Cousins Island on the mainland, but worth considering for sure. And 2049 is not that far away. We have this upcoming conversation about our priorities. This is obviously not as critical as a few of our other priorities, but it's clearly a priority. It's how we get back and forth. Did we get anywhere? We had a conversation at our last meeting about there was a list of engineers who were pre-qualified. Have we been able to validate whether that list is still in effect?
Carol and I are working on compiling a list and using any existing information from previous historical information that Herb had to get that together.
Okay. So we'll have to put that on the future agenda.
Yep.
One approach might be to take an engineering firm with appropriate skills and experiences and ask for a preliminary look at what that design project might look like. from that, hopefully without too much expense, be able to suss out whether we're talking about raising it in 2 feet or 4 feet. Some degree we need to do a sea level rise and wave run-up analysis like we're doing with the stone pier. To determine what's an appropriate increase over there. DOT might have information that they could share on that front. But why not?
As well as the number of spaces you might move, and then the other discussion with Yarmouth is how many spaces might you like to give Yarmouth? I mean, could be lighten up on some of the spaces that's broken out.
Yeah, I'm aware of
Yeah.
that conversation.
That
I,
is a different society.
as one of the people working directly with Yarmouth, I can tell you that we would lose friends very quickly. We propose to do that. They enjoy those spaces. They don't make their hard enough of them. And they also point out on occasion that there may be times when we have more than 165 cars in the lot and they choose not to let us know about that. That's been mentioned before in those meetings.
Yeah.
So yes, it's a conversation. I think Chris Mayo just threw out the ballpark that we lose a third of it. That was a ballpark off the top of his head estimate. If we raise cousins.
I don't know.
Remember that? No. So maybe I understood. We were not taking this. So Carol, we're on the agenda item where we are talking about the recent letter from DOT referencing the blanket lot. And the board is just talking about what next steps we might want to take. I mean, likelihood it's
Where is the parcel of land that people can consider on, you know,
well,
at the Wyman station? So
there
when
is a
you say-
large chunk of land controlled by a very large Spanish conglomerate that occupies the entire, most of the south end of Pleasant Valley.
I know.
That's all
When
we
you
got.
Okay, so when you said it would add 10 to 15 minutes, you didn't have a particular spot.
Well, if you look at where their facilities are now, it's a logical place to land with your.
That's what I was gonna say, around the corner was, what was it, the transportation, resolution team, met in the, late 1990s, I think, did a pretty in-depth, survey of what that would look like in terms of where the landing would be, how much would be, how long it would take to go around the corners. You would have to go around the corner, you wouldn't be able to have a foresight. And that raises the question of, okay, if we could somehow gain access to that land, what would happen to the Blanchard lot land, and would we get any, benefits from turning that land, or actually in DOT turning that land back over to Yarmouth? So there are all sorts of different considerations here. It's a very complex issue, and I fully support getting the ball rolling on addressing at least the issue of what it would take to make the Blanchard lots usable into the long-term future.
One thing we mentioned, Carol, was the possibility of approaching an engineering firm off that list that you would be working on. To start the conversation about what the design might look like. Probably wouldn't get a whole lot for free in such a conversation. We'll probably have to come back to the board once we had an idea of what an analysis might cost. We have to come back to the board and see if we had money to allocate from somewhere in the budget towards such a discussion.
And I think we maybe want to see if CTC wants to partner. They're generating revenue off the site, and it's not. So that's a conversation.
Paul.
Carol just touched on really what I plan to comment on. The letter in the packet from DOT includes a copy of the lease. Okay, the lease is obviously from the state of Maine, originally to the town of Cumberland, directly now to the town of Big Island. CTC is only mentioned in here with associated with parking restrictions. The revenues derived from the premises, from the Blanchard lot, are to benefit the people of Big Island, the transportation system. Any solution there is going to take a lot of money and a lot of planning. I think we are long overdue, all right, as a town, in taking control of this lot. The town of Big Island belongs as a lessee. I do not believe it's appropriate to sublet it to the current ferry operator so that they can manipulate the parking access and financially benefit from the revenue associated with it. I'd like to see the town consider taking action according to this so that we can accrue the funding based upon the usage of that lot, to use that funding to then solve the problems associated with it.
So are there any actions that the board would like to propose or discuss at this time relative to this topic? David?
I would just like to request that, on as soon an agenda as possible, that we can come back with a recommendation as to who we should be working with to at least assess the, situation on present. Wouldn't be a motion so much as a directive.
Vicky, what do you think about that?
I think you're leaving a very vague and open-ended direction. And I feel like I can bring back something to the board that I might feel is what you should be looking for, but you might not. I think I would like a little bit more of a funneled approach of it, is what you as a board are thinking the next steps should be. I mean, there are, several engineering studies or engineering firms out there. They're all very busy doing all of this relative information. So I think there needs to be kind of more specifics of what the board wants to proceed. Do you want to involve DOT in the discussions? Do you want to involve CTC in the discussions? Or do you want me to focus on bringing you an engineering firm that then at the following meeting, you can make a motion for me to get a quote, if that makes sense.
My thinking is more along the lines of, at least discovering what we need, to assess the problem. In other words, an RFP as far as what would be an approach by an appropriate firm and what it's going to cost us. And then we can start to figure out, how that ties into what other options are on the table and which ones aren't, and start, because right now I have no idea what direction we should be going. And this is kind of step one to figure out, well, okay, starting with what we have, what do we need to do to fix it? And is it worth fixing, or where do we go in a different direction?
Thanks, David. Carol, anything?
I think the first step is to meet with CPC. Either as there's a subgroup that was established at the request of CPC, which was Mark and myself. And and Dean, I think you're also on that group, so that might be the place to start. Because it's simple, and sort of have a conversation about this project, relative responsibilities, and at some point bring that back to the board. I think I know everybody wants to do something, but I don't think I'm not sure what the point is of getting an engineering estimate if we haven't got an arrangement of relevant responsibilities. And so I think that's where I would start. That's my recommendation. And I would start with the subcommittee that CPC, set up, and we haven't met for a while, so it would be a good idea. And I'm not saying we're going to come away with an answer, but I think we need to start the conversation with them.
Before you got here and talking about the meeting next Tuesday or whenever it is at the head of the pier on Pleasant, Richard volunteered to fill Mark's spot in that work. So one approach could be to have the board ask Richard and Carol to engage with that, re-engage with that group from CTC, that subcommittee of CTC, and begin to talk about options and direction, and then come back to the board with some sort of report out on that. Does that make sense to the board?
When you say options, what do you mean?
What you were just talking about, what Mark was talking about, what the CTC think we should be doing with that lot, what does the town think we should be doing with that lot? develop those ideas a bit and bring it back to the board. Does that mean?
Okay, I didn't know, I thought you meant sea level rise.
No.
Gotcha.
Does, yeah. Okay.
Sounds good.
So it seems that the parking lot needs to be addressed now because of what's been happening. Looking at property on the Wyman Station is really part of a larger picture that we need when we've talked about priorities. So trying to look at that needs to be we need a larger plan that we've talked about doing, so we can see if barging can happen from there. We need to see whether, how the arrangement would be made to get that land. So there's so many other questions. So my question to you is, how does that get best addressed? Is that a whole committee? What is the best way to?
There are two people from the board who would, at the request of the select board, if so directed, would meet with Yarmouth to see if Yarmouth has any further comments. I think, Carol, before you got here, it was mentioned that unofficially, informally, folks from Yarmouth have expressed an interest in opening up the conversation with one as to the use of that one.
Oh, okay. They are doing an expansion of their Madeline Point facility.
Yep, that was a gift that, as I understand it, that has led to more conversation.
So you're talking, if you walk up Wharf Road and go across, because of Island Road,
Yeah.
down the other side, yeah, that's now. I think they're expanding their parking to, I think about 50 cars. So, and you're talking about, in that case, the Yarmouth, what's the committee?
Joint Standing
Yeah,
representatives, which I believe used to be me again.
okay, well, I've never been part of that.
Most of the topics of that committee have had to do peer issues.
Can I make a suggestion? Based off of what I'm hearing all of you talk, maybe a good direction to start out with is the two board members meet with CTC and have discussions, but then the other two board members meet with the joint standing committee with Yarmouth and have the discussion, and then bring that back on the same agenda to circle to see what the outcome of those in, and maybe after that, make a next step as far as how you think proceeding might work.
Makes sense? Good approach, tying two things together. Oh, thank you. Mark,
I'll leave it to you. First of all, I appreciate the subject has been brought up. I appreciate all the efforts for contacting Chris Mayo and the DOT. And I have appreciated DOT's involvement from way back in '99, keep our parking in excess. But having said that, I'm pretty hesitant to think that picking the Blanchard parking lot up into the air, realizing probably going to lose parking spaces, is a good long-term solve. This community cannot afford to lose any more access to parking. So I'm urging the town of Quebec, and I'll be urging the District Transportation Company the same way, to start some conversations, some real conversations with the town of Yarmouth. Scott LaFlamme, the new town manager. I just talked with Nat Tucker on his float about this the other day at Cousins, about how realistic is it for us to stay at Foggy Shore and Blanchard parking lot? And would the town of Yarmouth, possibly with the assistance of DOT, talk about moving us somewhere else instead of putting possibly bad money into a repair? Thank you.
thank you.
Can you fill me in on this? When you say the town of Yarmouth is interested in opening up discussions, what does that mean?
Yeah, I had those totally unrelated meeting, two new officials from Yarmouth, civic officials, over coffee said, would you be at all interested in a conversation about land use at Lyman Station, something to that. They both started with, I'm new to this role. And I said, well, me too. And there was no intent at that point to open it up as a conversation, it was more of the.
So does that start with another conversation, or does it start in any way as an official conversation
Starts as the joint standing committee.
with the joint standing committee?
So either party can ask for a meeting in the JSC, and
Okay.
we will do that. Carol will open that time that sometime that we can propose to them. Try to get that conversation happening soon.
I think next week when we're meeting with the town manager would be a good time to kind of throw that in and say, before the cars are flooded again, can we start the conversation? So then we're moving forward in the right direction. So I think that might be a good idea to start that.
We're sort of meeting next Wednesday. Would that be, that's what you're.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not Wednesday, it's Monday. Right?
The 28th,
Oh, I'm sorry, no, it's 22, right?
Wednesday at 8:15 a.m.
David.
Yeah, the purpose of asking about what it would cost to fix the Blanchard lot is really, my opinion is the chances are it's gonna be a lot more than $1,500. And I think we need to determine that that is an unreasonable, whatever the cost is actually, whatever that is gonna be of a nature that we're gonna have to consider other options. So it's not an attempt really to fix the present time lot. It's not as much as to determine what it would cost us so that we know what our options are and what the alternatives are. And so, as I say, it's a way to fill out the form about what our options are, but I agree that what we need to be moving forward with the discussions with your, with the state committee is ridiculous.
Right.
And at the same time, I still think we ought to be able to, we should be able to say, this is how much it's gonna cost and it's ridiculous, we gotta do something else.
One more and then let's move on. We've already gone past our time. Yeah.
I think no matter the cost, the fact that DOT has said we would lose 1/3 of the spots.
Okay,
takes it
so
off the table.
I'm sorry. I remember that, but there's no minutes. Yeah, and whether they said that or not. I mean, the other option is simply to let it get wet and just make people move out of the parking lot when the storm comes. There's all kinds of options. but,
Yeah.
so,
If you don't mind, just, we also have to figure out how we're gonna pay for an engineering study.
Right.
And I think we could ask our town administrator to come back soon with what the options are to pay for an engineering study. And where that money might come from.
That I'm happy to do. I think that the challenge that we're running into is that there are several locations on the island that need engineering studies, reference to coastal erosion and coastal flooding and all of these storm events. And I think that the direction that the board is going in is really needing more or less a professional who can help you guide how to prioritize these and when to focus on what engineering. I think the town at this rate, hiring engineers for all of these things is going to run out of undesignated funds or have to go to having to bond money to be able to do some of this work. And so I think that's something that's really important to keep in the back of your mind, because the money's not, it's not a full pot of cash, and all these engineering studies are costing a lot of money. So.
Yeah, and I would guess the type of study we're talking about is $50,000.
So that's probably similar to what we're doing right now with FedEx Cove with GI.
All right. So we have two different groups of people who have assignments, and as soon as we can get some information back on those, we'll bring both of those threads back together with the agenda item, hopefully within the next meeting. Okay. All right. Moving on, item 24-076 to discuss contracting out marine infrastructure and take any necessary actions. Vika, you wanna ease that one up?
There is a memo that I typed up, a brief memo, just kind of, giving a little bit, very brief background as far as, what has led to having this be as an agenda item. As you're aware, we are down to one public works employee. Has been, several years of going back and forth of floats, being fixed, not being fixed to the way they should be, recommendations from Coastal Waters and so forth. And so at this point, Coastal Waters has secured 2 grants to replace and have 2 floats be built. There was the ramps, the planks that currently are down at CTC, where CTC comes in. They had secured for new ones to be there, but the ultimate issue is who is to maintain it and how that maintenance is to take place in a way where it's not deteriorating, and when it does, it to be fixed. Just recently, within the last 24 hours, I got an email from a resident providing information about how on the Cousins Island float, there is some shaping and strips that are wearing off. And so I'm in a position now where the one public works employee I have doesn't have the ability to do that. And so where do I go to hire somebody like that? And so that really kind of is providing an example to the bigger issue that exists. And the board has, several board members have mentioned about how maybe this is the next step. And so here it is as an agenda item for you to discuss, to see collectively what you think about it and how you would like to proceed with the marine infrastructure in this community.
Sure.
Recommend we put together an RFP for services, marine maintenance and management services, which includes, you know, the availability on an all-call basis if we have storm or damage. And I would ask Coastal Waters to do that. I think I did find, as I mentioned to you, these RFPs that they put out a while back. But I mean, I think with Herb and the committee, they could probably create that. They know best, I think, better than we do, what the RFP should contain. There's probably other ones around that could use it.
Any other comments from the board? I don't think we need a motion for that.
Nope, and that was, my suggestion was pretty much exactly what Carol just suggested. With how busy things are, there little things like this do take up some time. And so I don't want to put my energy in it without the board support in it. And so if that's the consensus of the board, I'll connect with Coastal Waters and the harbor master and have kind of a collective effort to try to put together some kind of, request for qualifications or proposals. So then we can put them out there and see if there are some marine infrastructure related businesses that would be interested in taking this on.
All right, moving on. Discuss.
Comments?
Oh, I'm
I
sorry.
don't know if
Yeah,
you did that. Sorry.
Any comments from the public on that discussion, that agenda item? All right, thank you. All right, so moving on to item 24-077 to discuss advertising and hiring for an emergency coordinator, its role, cost, etc., and take any necessary action. So little background, we for years had our fire chief designated as our EMA coordinator, not a role they had asked for. Through research, Vika has learned that other towns were in much the same situation. And the range of allocated funds to cover the position go from a low of 800 at Westbrook to a high of 8,000 in some small towns. And that probably just means that different amounts of the work is being done by the person taking on that mantle, if you will. And the rest of it's being done by someone in the town office, which is what's happening in Dock right now and becoming a bit instrumental. So any thoughts on how to approach any potential job description, role, etc., for an emergency management coordinator person? In the memo that came from the fellow at the state, he listed 3 or 4 different areas. One that the fire chiefs often like to take is the on-site when there's an emergency leadership that they're trained for and good at. Certainly have strong talents in that area on this island. But the paperwork, the data gathering, the preparing of reports is something that takes a lot of time after the storm or whatever the event is. So, I'm talking. Anybody else? I think thoughts.
I'd like to hear what are the descriptions of that position, so we know what they're paid to do, but what are the ranges of responsibilities in other communities? Because if we're looking at having this as a stipend position, we would need to have a clear idea of how many hours that could take and what would they need to be able to do.
So I in my memo, kind of touch on that. It's really difficult to provide that information to you right now. And the memo that it was back in January, I reached out, I think it was February 1st, I reached out to the main emergency, Cumberland County Emergency Management, and that's what was in the memo is what he provided. And so what I'm kind of at this point asking of the board is not so much go into the detail of figuring that out, because it's really hard to figure that out. And I think the position is becoming more needed as the recent frequency and severity of the storms. But for the time being, just for this fiscal year, put a number to it, advertise it. We really need mitigation, response, and recovery is the part. Ralph does a really good job with the preparedness to it, but it's really after the fact storms, the stuff that I'm doing right now that is time consuming at different times and really varies. And what I would recommend and would like support from the board is if we see if there is an interest from somebody to taking this on as a stipend position, I would be happy to walk the person through the process, knowing that in the next fiscal year, more detail would go into really determining what the need is of that position, what the responsibilities are, what the expected time frame, and so forth. But right now, I really can't give you a lot of that information, and that's just being very honest.
If I might, one approach would be to allocate an amount of money and to spend from that money as long as it's available as needed as emergencies occur. And then in the next budget year, look back and say, okay, we had too much allocated. We have something like legal services. Don't know up front what you're going to need for legal services. So you have a pool of money out there and you hopefully don't run out before the end of the year. I think a big question is what would be, I would suggest that we have someone on, not going to use the word retainer because that implies a fee for standing by, that we have someone available who's willing to do the work when such events occur. And in the areas that Mika mentioned, 3 of the 4 areas listed in the fellow's memo. And then perhaps we could ask the town administrator to ask some other towns, what is the hourly rate that is paid for this kind of work in their towns?
Stipends. I've talked to a couple of different islands, Long Island in particular, and then I have had some conversation kind of on the side through a lot of this particular process, and majority of these positions are stipend positions. And the problem that a lot of these towns are going into is that it wasn't really a position that was really thought of or used frequently until the last couple of years. And now a lot of towns are scrambling, trying to figure out the same process, what fits, how does it work, and what the need is.
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting that we follow that rule. I would not be in favor of taking a stipend approach because in a good year, we're giving someone money to not do much. And in a terrible year, we're expecting someone to do a ridiculous amount of work for a small amount of money. What I was looking for was insight on an appropriate hourly rate for that kind of work. So if it's data gathering and compilation, it's manipulating spreadsheets, it's working with federal agencies to fill out reports, is that level of expertise consistent with town clerk or with bookkeeper, or maybe municipal might have some ideas as to what an appropriate range of hourly rates might be. And then if we had 15,000 in the budget and it was $30 an hour, then at the end of 150 hours, we'd be out of money. That kind of conversation, what I was thinking. Carol.
I can find out.
So do we have, what's the position that the fire department has right now? Do they have a stipend, administrative assistant position, or is that no longer?
So there is an administrative position. It averages about 8 to 10 hours a week. And I have sat down and talked to the administrative assistant, but then also another individual that helps the administrative assistant when they're not able to. And the discussion was really, we can help you when we can, but it depends on if we're able to. And so it's, it would be very difficult to have that particular position take this on, because I don't think there is the availability and the time to the level that is needed at this point.
That job more aimed at ongoing activities, expense account reconciliation, bill paying.
Order and things, a lot of administrative work to kind of assist with the fire chief in coordinating maintenance to equipment, things like that.
So you're talking about somebody to fill this position through the end of the fiscal year and then we regroup. And do you have like any idea, like you think it's 5 to 10 hours a week probably?
I'm looking at the average of what I've been putting in. It really has varied anywhere between 5 to 10, 15 hours a week. I think when they were coming out here more frequently, it was taking up a lot of the time. I'm hopeful that with the transition of a new person that's going to take over, that's going to ease the pain a little bit. But I mean, I think at this point, this week I put very little to no time in it. I think I had 1 20-minute phone conversation. Last week, it was, almost 9 hours. So it really varies week by week.
And do you assume that the amount of work you're doing with FEMA and MEMA and EMA now will last throughout the entire fiscal year, or do you see that tapering down after we get past the first of the calendar year, or what's your best guess on that front?
So 2 of the, I believe 4, their designations, so category A and category C, the coastal or debris removal and emergency response, those are getting ready to close out. But then anything that the town picks up in terms of work relevant to South Shore Drive, East Shore Drive, or any of the coastal accesses, the more the town does, the more reporting and involvement will be with those particular agencies in providing that information to them and having to close out a lot of some of that work. My concern is more relative to taking on and doing this right now. But if a couple of these storms hit in winter time and then those storms are taking up kind of the early stages of what this storm did, then it would become a lot more time consuming.
So do you think, so I know the 2 bigger projects are going to get rolling soon. Do you expect will the amount of paperwork and clerical work be higher because the dollar figure is higher, or will it be about the same because it's the same number of forms?
I think it would be this, I would think it would be about the same, because the process of submission is similar. Now that I know what it is, that it's taken a long time for that information to be provided.
So that's been work you've been doing for a couple of months now with FEMA, 3 months?
So in March is when the declaration, was official, and so a lot of the work for FEMA really picked up in April, between April and now.
So if that's taken 5 months to clean up, then maybe these other ones are gonna take 5 months to clean up, which takes us into a good part of the fiscal year. Do we have money in the administrative budget for this?
So my recommendation, the board suggested, and it was voted at town meeting, for selectmen's contingency to have $23,000 in it. And so that's $10,000 more than the board has had in previous years. And so I wouldn't recommend eating all of that up for the sake of, making sure that there's some money for other unexpected expenses. But if you were to designate a chunk of cash towards that, then that's where that money could potentially come from. That would be my recommendation. If we creep into a part-time position out of the admin line, then we're really almost setting ourselves up for the expectation of going over budget at the end of the fiscal year, if that's where that money would come from.
Sure.
Looking at the long term for this fiscal year, I think we may need to appropriate more money for engineering services for coastal erosion. And I think we maybe should try to pick up this. I think maybe we should be looking at doing that sooner rather than later. Having a special, as much as we all need to do it, maybe a special town meeting, because even to move, I think we only had 30,000. How much do we only had 40,000 in the coastal. That would be where I do inclined to take the money from, rather than
Coastal access?
Yeah, we renamed it coastal erosion.
Oh, yes.
The reason being that I think that's gonna become a real live thing, to be seen as a capital thing, and we may have to fund it before the end of this fiscal year.
The coastal, so there was $58,000 in that particular account. Some money was set aside in that at town meeting, and I believe 15 of it was designated recently to doing work down at the hook.
Right, and you have money for the.
78,000 is what the total number in that account, minus 15.
That's where I mean, you're the town administrator. That's where I would take the money from, because that's what it's related to. And I think the contingency budget is a contingency budget, and this is an ongoing concern. I mean, that's my, that's what I would suggest, but hear what other people.
When the town is dealing with the damages, can the administrative cost be a part of that? So when
If approved by FEMA, yes. And so I'm keeping track of the time that I put in every time I meet with FEMA. I have a specific little notebook that I write my notes in there. And so when the time comes and I ask for that information, that would all be reimbursable. If it gets reimbursed, and that's the difficult part of having worked with FEMA, is their mindset is go ahead and spend the money, and then we'll let you know if it's reimbursed, not realizing that.
And again, what is the date of when we would learn that, whether it's?
It's really ongoing at this point. So the deadline for these two particular submissions for the ones that I spoke to earlier is September 20th of 2024. So once that is closed out, then they'll take whatever time frame it is for them to determine whether it's reimbursable and if we're granted that money. If we are, then we would be able to take that revenue and offset it most likely into probably some of the expenses for fiscal year 24. because that's where a lot of the time came out of.
Realistically and conservatively, we have to assume we're spending it, and then we might get lucky.
And it's the year, it could be a year.
So again, I think putting a chunk of money aside and then assigning a job description and some arrangements as to when the person would get called in by the town administrator to work on these things. And then an hourly rate as a part-time seasonal employee, if you will, might be a good way to at least get this started.
As opposed to having it be a stipend position and seeing how it goes.
I would, all the towns seem to be struggling with their stipend. And if it's a stipend and we have 4 storms, that person can quit. If it's a stipend and we have no storms, we've spent money that we didn't get anything back. I would make it an hourly thing and let the town administrator determine when the person needs to come to work. David.
Do we have anybody interested in this position?
So, no, but that's why I'm not going out and exploring and trying to find somebody without having the board support that idea. And I mean, employees aren't exactly easy to come about, but I struck out pretty well with a couple of the things that I'll be discussing with you in executive session. So I would like to at least put it out there to see if there's somebody on the island that is interested to take that on, to, you know, to work a random couple hours here and there to make some couple $1,000s here and there.
Well, I would suggest that what we do, what our town administrator do, is basically draft a job description with an open-ended pay schedule with some ranges or something. It's got to be loose, and yet it's got to give some idea of what the position's about and what the responsibilities are going to be, so that we can start to determine what the interest is in somebody local, which I think we would have to be, to perform these services.
Thank you. Sure.
Yeah, I think it might be worth trying to recruit a retired engineer for that job. And some of it could be done remotely, because a lot of meetings are remote, right? So
Yeah.
I think that could be beneficial, and I could check through my contacts, because I think, you know, that might be feasible if it's, you know, not 40 hours a week. So I think I agree, write the job description, sort of the pay scale. And personally, you know, I think personally, I'd rather use the, whatever it is, coastal erosion fund than the contingency fund, because I think it could, you know, climb to $10,000 by the end of the year. So I hate to spend half of our contingency on something that I think is gonna be an ongoing thing. And I think we are gonna go back to the voters. My guess is before the end of the fiscal year, for some money, or even if it's just design and engineering services, or if it's Cousins Island, if it's Southborough Road.
So does that sound good to the board? That's okay.
Is that
Good.
good for you?
All right.
So do you want me to draft something up and bring it back to you, or do you want to make a motion and designate a certain amount of money so that's on the table, and then I can work to get this figured out, and then, you know, share it with the board to see if they're in support of it before I advertise it? How do you want to handle this moving forward?
I think we need to see it before we have.
So we'll bring it back at the next meeting.
Very good. All right. Comments from the public on that agenda item? Okay. Thank you. And moving forward to item 24-078 to discuss the upcoming dates and discussions with Weston and Sampson relative to the stone pier and take any necessary action. So a little bit of background, the sea level rise analysis is finally complete, and the final touches on the recommendations are being made, I believe, as we speak. Weston Sampson is coming to meet with the board on September 11th in executive session to discuss some land issues. And then Weston Sampson will be here on October 3rd, I believe it is, at 6 o'clock at night for a public workshop on the designs that they've come up with that incorporate improvements to the stone pier in terms of public safety, improvements to the stone pier in terms of sea level rise, in combination with the widening of Wharf Road and the potential but not yet determined use of land from a golf course for additional parking spaces. So those are the dates we have on the table right now with Weston Sampson. Any comments from the board, questions? Nope.
You sent out an email about the October 3rd meeting. If you have a time yet.
6 p.m. There'll be a public workshop and it will end by 8 so they can get on the 8:15 vote and go back to Massachusetts. Here.
Then what is the executive session on September 11th?
That will be to have Weston Sampson and Woods Hole Group update the entire board on everything that has taken place up to this point and get their final direction from the board as to what it is that will be presented.
Yeah.
And
And that's what.
no, that's from
Well, no, yeah.
4:30. 12:30 to 2:30 to 4. It's a All right.
Whereas the purpose for the executive session is there, so when we hold executive sessions, there are a handful of very specific things that if they're discussed, they have to be an executive session. In this particular case, it's the land acquisition and development, so it cannot be discussed in public at this point, which is why the discussion is taking place in executive session.
And the other thing, which you and I discussed, but I think it's important that we receive for, what day is that? The meeting was Wednesday.
Before they come to discuss.
So, I mean, the week before, at least the weekend, you need to read the report and that should go to the board. The reason I'm bringing it up is that we've had challenges with them before. So I think they absolutely have to deliver the report to give us time to read it, or else the meeting will not be productive.
Yeah, and the three of us, we've been working with them. They're trying to get together with us to finalize that report next week.
Okay.
Okay, any comments? Any more comments from the board? Comments from the public? Mark?
Very quickly, if I may, just wondering, when Weston Sampson comes to the public presentation in October, how detailed do you think their report will be as far as recommended height of picking up the stormwater, at least for right now, and proposed design that would go to structural engineers as far as widening and encroaching on the intertidal area? How specific do you think it will be under October?
Sure.
I think, we have a scenario of heights for us. I think it's gonna be not necessarily them. They're gonna give us some ranges, and it's gonna be up to the community to decide, because we may decide not to raise it so high, and they use access to certain conditions, 100 years time. We might accept that going forward, something like that. So I think but I think they have all the specifics on what the heights are for the different sea level rise and storm surge projections specific to the storm pier. So I think there'll be a lot of detail on that. I think they won't necessarily pick the number. Then on the engineering design, I think that will not be very specific at this stage. In terms of an engineering design, that is the next stage. And so we have some decisions to make as a community about that. And so I think what this is presenting, this, sea level rise plan, which requires some community feedback, and then also kind of the configuration, widening the road, all of those questions that need to be brought forward. And I will say this isn't exactly the plan that was presented, that sort of came out of the end of the Wright Pierce study, because there are some things in that plan that are really not feasible. So that's part of, we need to kind of reconnect with the community and kind of, get everybody engaged about where we're at right now. And so that's how I would do it.
I had one thing more. The thing that helped me frame up what to me is important about the community conversation in October. When there's a hurricane, school kids aren't going to school. But when there's a hurricane, ambulances still need to go across the water if CTC is done. So, you know, when there's a hurricane, if it's a 2-foot rise, you know, what does that mean about rescue? What does that mean about schools? If there's just a high water event, it's a 1 foot, all those kind of conversations, I think require a lot of public gnashing and decision making ultimately, but I think we have a lot of conversations to go through before we can finalize on what exactly it is we want to provide at the cemetery in terms of access.
And I would agree with that. Thank you.
One other thing worth mentioning is we just recently secured another $75,000 grant through DOT to move forward with the next phases.
Great.
And we've heard a little bit more back from Congressman Ingrid's office about the making of sausage that is the budget process in Washington these days, and what are the different scenarios in which we might expect to find out when the money that both Ingrid and Collins put into their plans for us. Yes. Yeah, as you know, the budget is still, you know,
Thank you.
trying to hold them. Okay, moving forward. Other business, I have an item, and it's important to me personally, because I'm leaving the country. Our January meeting, our first meeting in January, according to the schedule, is on January 1st. Yes, it is. January 1st is the first Wednesday. And then, soon after that, I leave for a couple of weeks. So I'm definitely going to miss a meeting in January. I apologize for that. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity. However, I would appreciate it personally if we could begin to at least think about, if not decide, what we're going to do about that first meeting, because I leave on January, I think it's the 6th, for this trip. So if we push the meeting off by a week, A, we'd be having our next meeting a week after that, and B, I would miss 2 meetings.
You have a suggested date?
Well, if January 1st is a Wednesday, I would suggest that we meet on that Thursday instead of the Wednesday. That would seem to be a fairly easy solution if people think they'll be back.
And then the 15th.
And then the next meeting on the 15th, I will not be back yet, but we do have a vice chair. So any thoughts on moving the meeting from January 1st to January 2nd?
I have no plans for that date at this time.
How's it going?
Sounds good.
And formally, this will be good work on the national holiday. And I will be traveling then, but I could, well,
You could be back by the 2nd.
by the second.
So let's move it to the 2nd.
The 2nd, okay.
Thank you for that. And then we already talked about the other scheduled item. Any other business from the board or from the town administrator?
No, it all got, to my knowledge, taken care of in my TA report. Anything that has to be that I would have shared in other business, I shared in the TA report, so.
Moving on, any communications items to share?
So the one communication item I do want to share is, and I forwarded this to the board earlier, is I had reached out to the town attorney to get a better guideline on at what point do you share something in public and at what point don't, what is worth sharing, what isn't. In the time that I've been here, it seems like we have gotten into the habit and almost an expectation that almost everything that goes through email has to be shared, created in longer meetings and creating longer discussions. And so the the recommendation from the town administrator is, excuse me, the town attorney was really to use your judgment, use your discretion as far as what could be shared. And that all the communications that come through, whether they're complaints, recommendations, suggestions, don't necessarily need to be read at every public meeting. And so I just wanted to raise that to the board, to maybe think in terms of how that is shared in communications, moving forward. It is an agenda item that I believe at some points in time wasn't even on the agenda. And so I think it's an opportunity to maybe improve how that is done. And so I really wanted to bring that to the board's attention, specifically.
I think if I read it correctly, sometimes I don't even share them at all. And
Correct.
so I think it would be to try to prioritize only things that are, have a significant impact on the ongoing projects or, I think we can use our best judgment, but sort of an email about, I couldn't, my car got stuck at Sandy Point. I kind of don't think that's worthwhile. I think the only thing is if an individual gets an email or correspondence from, say, a property owner, there maybe should be a system to share that with the rest of the board. That's all. But I don't think we need to cover it in
I think we do in our communications policy point to how the TA responds if the TA receives correspondence from a
Right.
citizen, and how the chair responds if the board receives any communication from a citizen. I don't know that we speak to how individual board members should respond if they receive an individual. That might be something to talk about in the future.
Yeah, and I don't think that happens that often. Most of them seem to become.
Little.
Well, I received an email addressed to me in my personal email address from appealing to me as a select board person. And it had to do with the parking and had to do with the transfer station. So they were good general questions. I wasn't sure if I should bring it up here, but I chatted with them and it seems like it's.
I think the one thing that, in reference to the communications that I think is worth noting and is important, and it's something that I think Mitch really touched upon, is really knowing as a board when you're being kind of the policymaker versus the implementer, and recognizing when it is appropriate, because your volunteers, you have limited time, when to pass it on and say, go talk to the town administrator, go talk to the town office. They will communicate with the chair, put it in the agenda if it's worth discussion. And so I think that's where the board at your discretion kind of using it. How much time are you investing in it, and when do you push it over on the people whose job it is to have to deal with some of that?
So these were questions that were accurately addressed by referring them to the policy.
Awesome. All right, with that, items to be added to a future agenda.
Minutes.
Sorry, thank you. To approve, is there a motion to approve the minutes from August 7th? Moved by David, was there a second? Second by Carol, discussion? All in favor? Unanimous, thank you. Items to be placed on a future agenda. Hopefully in September, a parking recap. What did we learn from this experiment? What are our next steps? And at some point, hopefully in the near future, bringing together the two people from the board who will be talking with CPC and the two people who will be talking to JFC together to talk about parking on that side. And then hopefully in the next couple of meetings to review an RFP from Coastal Waters relative to the detail of what we're outsourcing for marine infrastructure. And then from our town administrator to bring back to us a job description and that kind of detail relative to an emergency coordinator, at which point we'll take other action that might include how we fund it. And that's all I had on this list.
I do think we should try to schedule this meeting, that this kind of retreat style meeting,
Yep.
because I'm afraid
Just
it
slip.
won't happen.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking October, I think we had said October, because we have more information on the stonework by then.
Yep.
And so it seemed like, but I think we should try to schedule that.
I do too, and I would.
I am done.
And also before we meet, to be able to come up with a survey for the community. So I think let's work on that, a love survey. But have an open survey so that when we do have the retreat, we have information from the community, so. Anyone work on anything?
I have a suggestion.
Yes.
So back a little while ago, Chip Emery volunteered his services in terms of doing something, I believe it was relative to Bennett's Cove at that point. I wonder if he could be used as a resource in helping reach the community about the fact that the town is trying to determine what the priorities are and how they could be involved. And that might be a good time for him to create a brief video that then people would see and then go to a survey area somewhere.
And I do think, I'd be glad to speak with them, and I do think if we're doing a survey, it should not have specific points, but be very open-ended, so that it's not being front-loaded by concerns, but in fact, eliciting a lot of raw data on what people think is important.
Does the board want to try to set a date now, sometime in October?
Yeah, well, I just think it won't happen. Also, next.
And then when you want.
At our last discussion, I remember correctly, the sense of the board was that we would do this as an open meeting. Discussion of priorities as an open meeting. At one point, we've been talking about it as,
I thought we were
Retreat.
doing it.
Thought it was a
as private-
retreat.
not private, but offsite and as a workshop for ourselves primarily.
that was the beginning of our last conversation, but I thought we ended it in a different direction. I'm happy to do it either way.
I personally think the board could benefit from an offsite meeting where we kind of discuss our priorities, and they're always public, but I do think, having done a number of those on school committee, that's how I would recommend that.
So
That was Jen's vision when we.
is that okay with the board? So that sounds like a Saturday?
Yep.
So, Saturday, the October 5th. We can find the location.
That's the following
So
weekend.
we don't want to.
14th.
Thank you. So the 5th sounds good.
We will have had our Western Sampson public workshop already. So how about the 5th, location to be advised, but
I unfortunately have a school board meeting, so.
can't do it. Okay.
And it's not.
Okay, so
The holiday is the 12th.
Holiday is the 14th.
The 14th, so we probably don't want to do this.
okay, so the 19th, I am gone.
So how about this, the weekend, the last weekend of September?
Well, then we won't have had our public workshop with Western Sampson, but that's probably okay.
I will not. be-
Okay, then here we go. Okay, maybe we do, I mean, I'm the only one that can't do it.
Can you do it on a Sunday?
Because
I mean,
for the Sunday, I can do the 6th.
Sunday the 6th would work great for me.
That would be preferable.
I will be on island that week, but I'm coming back to the other side. Already.
You board.
My.
So are you saying you can't do it on the 6th?
I mess up my entire, can do it. Yeah,
Could we look at the 26th of October?
it's like renting our-
I'll give you one.
How about September 29th? That's after the Western and Sampson. Well, no, that's.
so the public workshop is in October.
No, I guess we should do it.
Yeah, so is there something wrong with the golf course?
So Columbus Day weekend.
Columbus Day.
I don't think we want, it's for his benefit, if nothing else. Right.
I mean, I get an extra day, so I would almost prefer to.
The Sunday the 6th work for you?
Sunday, the 6th worth, but I'm fine with doing it the Columbus Day weekend too.
Oh, you are.
What about the 26th of October?
Why
On
we
Monday.
not- Why are we
No,
not
it's
doing
not.
that at this time?
So then, wait,
Yeah, this is why, see, that's why I said we gotta schedule.
So the 6th or the 26th?
The other option before we commit is that we could do a weekday as long as I know well enough ahead of time. So if that logistically is easier for people, I could do a weekday, but and people would have to, you know, be out of the office, but that is an option. And it might be better than a weekend.
October 9th is a Wednesday. What about that Wednesday morning?
Are we doing a half day?
I would
We
say,
could do, or a whole day. I could do, I mean, let's make sure we block out a whole day, in case it's like
how about October 9th?
8 to
Okay.
10, 8 to 2.
Okay,
All right, that's,
David,
that
you
works.
Yeah.
That's nice.
What time frame again? Just
Morning till mid-afternoon.
this morning?
I'm blocking out 8 till 4, and then once we find a location, we can go from there. Does anybody want to work with Vika on a location kind of thing, or do you want me to do that? I'm easy to
Well,
do.
last time we almost did this, we did go to Wolf Neck, we had screwed up the reservation, so it was pretty reasonable.
You do it with them? Yep.
So we could try Wolf Neck if people are comfortable with that, it's not too far, but it feels like it's a long way.
Vika, can you check with them and see if they're available on that day?
yeah,
I'll send you the balance.
thank you.
All right, sweet,
Thank you.
great. All right, and we have a lot of other items on the agenda. Again, there's a spreadsheet out there that has a long list of future agenda items. So you feel free to look at that anytime. Yes, ma'am.
I have, wait, till I get there. Is it okay to stand right here?
Yep, you're okay right there. You're being caught.
I have a question related in my mind to communications. I kind of expected that you might report on a communication regarding barging from somebody. And I'm wondering if you received a communication from anyone, you know, Lionel or whatever, about an incident on Monday when a moving van was backing off the barge. I take it by your expression that you.
No,
I saw the moving van back off the barge and I saw it kind of, you know, the rear end of the, well, it looked like the rear end, maybe, I don't know. So then the moving van backed up the road and I was out documenting, you know, the activity and was up, way up on the hill, and then it came forward a bit. And stayed there. The driver, the team, 3 people, told me they had punctured a tire. It sounded like they perhaps hit the corner of the concrete ramp coming on. I'll send you an email, just so it's on the record.
okay,
It caused, you know, a little bit of congestion up on the hill. The moving van sort of of course they had a flat tire. And they sort of pulled into Rodney's driveway. Meanwhile, the other trucks are coming up, and of course there were other kinds of traffic on the road at the same time. I'm surprised we didn't hear about it.
no,
I mean, it
Didn't-
seems
have not
rather
received-
significant to me.
have not received any communication relative to that whatsoever.
Thanks, Becky.
You're welcome.
All right, would entertain a motion to enter executive session.
My personal to executive or to Mountain RSA 6, section 6, and personnel matters and appointment candidate.
Is there a second? By Liza, all in favor? All right. Second. Down the birds. Thank you, Becky.